In my country, the United States, there was no question that we had a genocide fully as severe and fully as racist and fully as vicious as the Nazi Holocaust. Of course, it wasn't industrialized. And it took place over 300 years. And also, the relationships between the peoples involved, in this case, the European settlers and the Aboriginal inhabitants, so-called Indians, all right, was very different from the relationship between the Uber race, the super race, the Ubermenschen Nazi, and the Untermenschen Jews, okay, because the Nazis, the Europeans and the Jews have been living together for thousands of years, whereas in the United States, obviously, the settlers came and the Indians were seen as radically strange and wild people who were threatened all kinds of, internal disequilibrations, mentally as well as socially. So yes, of course there are differences, and there are important differences, and every historian, every sensible human being should understand them. But was the Holocaust was the genocide against the American Indians not as bad as the genocide against the Jews? How can you say that? That means basically that the American Indian was less of a person, less of a human being. And in fact, they suffered as much. They suffered incredible amounts. And they fought back more than the Jews fought back. That's because the circumstances were different. So each Holocaust is concrete and it has to be studied as such. Racism itself is something that moves to the abstract. You look for essentialism, Jewish essentialism, essentialism, or in this case now, Arab essentialism, and you lose the thread of the concreteness. But if you study it concretely and reflectively, you'll see that the Holocaust was visited by the Nazis on the Jews as horrific. Yes, of course. When you get beyond the horrificness of it, you can see, well, could it have been stopped? Can it be prevented? You say, yes, well, yeah, it could have been stopped. Maybe it would have been too tough to stop. If World War I had not happened, or if it had come out in a better way, or if Germany hadn't been blamed, or if capitalism hadn't been capitalism, and so on, or patriarchy hadn't been in control. But you can say it could have been stopped because you could have, logically, you could have fought anti-Semitism. You could have fought the roots of anti-Semitism. You could have fought for a better society. You could have done what the socialists and the left was trying to do, including the Jewish left. Jews throughout the left, the Jews of the Bund, for instance, the Polish, the syndicalist movement, fought Nazism tooth and nail, or the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, one of the great dramas of human history. They refused to. The Warsaw Ghetto was the Gaza of its time, really, and the outcome was horrendous. But they fought back. But you can also say, in general, if you want to have no Holocausts, what you should do is build societies that are egalitarian, that are not dominated by male, patriarchally centered militaristic groups, that are not capitalist and imperialist in their character, that do not have irreconcilable class differences. I mean, these are the things rather this class victory of the universal underclasses and so on. These are the things that made for the real Holocaust. Okay, sure, it was different, but so was the Holocaust against the Congolese different, or the Holocaust against the Armenians different, or the Holocaust against the American Indians. These are all different. And they all could have been overcome if you understand the history. Now, having said that, not too bad. How much time am I doing? I haven't really talked about Zionism yet. Zionism was the third of the big options available to Jews in response to the crisis of living in Europe at the late 19th century. Unlike migration, which would just say, we'll get along, we'll try to make our way in bourgeois society, maybe in the U.S., Argentina, wherever. Or we'll try to transform the society, as obviously my sympathies are with the Jews who tried to transform society. I think that was the proper way to be Jewish, and to take the universalism inherent in the Jewish tradition, which stems from one thread from the biblical legacy, okay, and the prophetic tradition. Remember, the Jewish people produced these great prophets, Isaiah and the like, and the Jewish people produced Jesus. Let's face it, there's a lot there, okay? Very proud of that. But you can take that and you can say, that's my legacy. I'm going to use it to transform the society. I'm going to fight anti-Semitism. But then there's the third option, Zionism, which is a minuscule option until now. It's striking, now that Israel looms so large in the world stage, you forget that for quite a while it was just virtually a joke. I mean, it was a squabbling bunch of European intellectuals who had this fantasy that they could, instead of fighting anti-Semitism and rebuilding the society, or just trying to normalize yourself in another society, decided that they were just going to get away from the society and recreate their own ancient kingdom on a utopian basis. And to do so, they borrowed various kinds of socialist maxims and ideas. In part because what they set about to do was very transgressive, because it was a society that was going to have to become a state on land that somebody else was occupying, and it was going to involve tremendous transgressions. And so, from the very beginning, they had what's called a bad conscience, because the Jews always saw themselves as innocent victims and the like. And this is just Jewish. Zionism is a Jewish vicissitude. It's an outcome, all right, that took that position and said, well, let's just get out of Europe and build our own kind of society. And to do so, we'll do it as socialists. So, we're doing it for a higher purpose. Utopian goals are necessary for in part because to counterbalance the transgression involved in what they knew had to be the case. And you look at from Herzl's diaries to the very beginnings of the Zionist movement, they knew that it would involve a colonial settler project that would require displacement of the indigenous people. That's it. There's no way you can build a state without getting rid of the people who already were there. I mean, not just pushing you to a state, but an ethnic state, a state for the Jewish people. Couldn't happen otherwise. So, they had a very peculiar then relationship to anti-Semitism. They had a relationship to anti-Semitism where they hated it and wanted to get away from it, but also needed it. And that's very important. A very basic difference between Zionism and other forms of Jewish reaction to the crisis of the times was that the Zionists were dependent upon anti-Semitism and had no interest, no fundamental interest in transforming it. Why? Because if they transformed it, then they would have no reason to leave. And they wanted to leave and build their own society.